morning, fourth grade, and welcome to the third week of our Read Aloud Holes. In our chapters today, we're going to kind of see the warden's demeanor change. And what demeanor means is it's kind of the attitude that a person has. That's what demeanor means. And so when Stanley and X-Ray found that gold tube and the warden found out about it the first day, she was so nice to them, right? She was like, oh, you boys get to go home early. Everyone else kind of like digs together. We can work together. We're going to find this stuff, right? So she had like a lot of like a really kind of like a cheery demeanor because she was excited that they were onto something. We're going to kind of see that demeanor kind of switch as we go later into this book, and especially in this chapter, as she starts to get kind of frustrated when they don't find much else. So let's get started with that. Chapter 17. For the next week and a half, the boys continued to dig in and around the area where X-Ray had supposedly found the gold tube. They widened X-Ray's hole as well as the holes Armpit and Squid had been digging, until the fourth day when all three holes met and became one big hole. As the days wore on, the warden became less and less patient. She arrived later in the morning and left earlier in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the boys continued to dig later and later. This is no bigger than it was when I left you yesterday, she said after arriving late one morning, well after sunrise. What have you been doing down there? Nothing, said Squid. It was the wrong thing to say. At just that moment, Armpit was returning from a bathroom break. How nice of you to join us, she said. And what have you been doing? I had to, go. The warden jabbed at Armpit with her pitchfork, knocking him backward into the big hole. The pitchfork left 3 holes in the front of his shirt and 3 tiny spots of blood. You're giving these boys too much water, the warden told Mr. Pendansky. They continued to dig until late afternoon, long after all the groups had finished for the day. Stanley was down in the other big hole, along with the other 6 boys. They had stopped using the wheelbarrows. He dug his shovel into the side of the hole. He scooped up some dirt and was raising it up to the surface when Zigzag's shovel caught him on the side of the head. He collapsed. He wasn't sure if he passed out or not. He looked up to see Zigzag's wild head staring down at him. I ain't digging that dirt up, Zigzag said. That's your dirt. Hey, Mom, Magnet called. Caveman's been hurt. Stanley brought his fingers up to the side of his neck. He felt his wet blood and had a pretty big gash just below his ear. Magnet helped Stanley to his feet, then up and out of the hole. Mr. Sir made a bandage out of a piece of his sack of sunflower seeds and taped it over Stanley's wound. Then he told him to go get back to work. It isn't nap time. When Stanley returned to the hole, Zigzag was waiting for him. That's your dirt, Zigzag said. You have to dig it up. It's covering my dirt. Stanley still felt a little dizzy. You could see a small pile of dirt. It took him a moment to realize that it was the dirt which had been on his shovel when he was hit. He scooped it up, then Zigzag dug a shovel into the ground beneath where Stanley's dirt has been. Chapter 18. The next morning, Mr. Sir marched the boys out to another section of the lake, and each boy dug his own hole, 5 feet and 5 feet. Stanley was glad to be away from the big hole. At least now he knew just how much he had to dig for the day. It was a relief to not have the other shovel swinging past his face, or the warden hanging around. He dug a shovel into the dirt, and then slowly turned to dump it into a pile. He had to make sure his turns were smooth and slow. If he jerked too quick, he felt a throbbing pain just above his neck where Zigzag's shovel had hit him. That part of his head between his neck and his ear was considerably swollen. There were no mirrors in camp, but he imagined that he looked like he had just been a boiled egg sticking out of him. Which, boiled egg, we kind of call those like goose eggs when you have a big bump on your head if you bang your head. So he's calling it like a boiled egg. The remainder of his body hardly hurt at all. His muscles had strengthened and his hands were tough and calloused. This was the slowest digger, but not all that much slower than Magnet. Less than 30 minutes after Magnet returned to camp, Stanley spat in his hole. Dear Mom and Dad, camp is hard but challenging. We've been running obstacle courses and have to swim long distances on the lake. Tomorrow we learn. He stopped writing as Zero walked in the tent, then returned to his letter. He didn't care what Zero thought. Zero was nobody. To rock climb. I know that sounds scary, but don't worry. Zero was standing beside him now, watching him write. Stanley turned and felt his neck throb. I don't like it when you read over my shoulder, okay? Zero said nothing. I'll be careful. It's not all fun and games here, but I think I'm getting a lot out of it. It builds character. The other boys... I don't know how, said Zero. What? Can you teach me? Stanley didn't know what he was talking about. Teach you to what? Rock climb? Zero stared at him with penetrating eyes. What? Said Stanley. He was hot, tired, and sore. I want to learn how to read and write. said Zero. Stanley let out a short laugh. He wasn't laughing at Zero. He was just surprised. All this time he thought Zero was reading over his shoulder. Sorry, he said. I don't know how to teach. After digging all day, he didn't have the strength to try to teach Zero to read and write. He needed to save his energy from the people who counted. You don't have to teach me how to write, said Zero. Just to read. I don't have anybody to write to. Sorry, Stanley said again. His muscles and hands were the only part of his body that had toughened over the past several weeks. His heart had hardened as well. He finished his letter. He barely had enough moisture in his mouth to seal and stamp the envelope. It seemed that no matter how much water he drank, he was always thirsty. Chapter 19. He was awakened one night by a strange noise. At first, he thought it could have been some sort of animal, and it frightened him. But as the sleep cleared from his head, he realized that the noise was coming from the cot next to him. Squid was crying. You okay? Stanley whispered. Squid's head jerked around. He sniffed and caught his breath. Yeah, I'm fine. In the morning, Stanley asked Squid if he was feeling better. What are you, my mother? Asked Squid. Stanley raised and lowered one shoulder. I got allergies, okay? Squid said. Okay, said Stanley. You open your mouth again and I'll break your jaw. Stanley kept his mouth shut most of the time. He didn't talk too much to any of the boys, afraid that he might say the wrong thing. They called him caveman and all that, but he couldn't forget that they were dangerous too. They were all here for a reason. As Mr. Sir would say, this isn't a Girl Scout camp. Stanley was thankful that there were no racial problems. X-Ray, Armpit, and Zero were black. He, Squid, and Zigzag were white. Magnet was Hispanic. On the lake, they were all the same reddish-brown color, the color of the dirt. He looked up from his hole to see a water truck in its trailing dust cloud. His canteen was almost a quarter full. He quickly drank it down and then took his place in line behind Magnet in front of Zero. The air was thick with heat, dust, and exhaust fumes. Mr. Sir filled their canteens. The truck pulled away. Stanley was back in his hole, shovel in hand, when he heard Magnet call out, Anybody want sunflower seeds? Magnet was standing at ground level, holding a sack of seeds. He popped a handful into his mouth, chewed, and swallowed, shells and all. Over here, called X-Ray. The sack looked to be about half full. Magnet rolled on the top and tossed it to X-Ray. How'd you get it without Mr. Sir seeing you? Asked Armpit. I can't help it, Magnet said. He held up both hands, wiggled his fingers, and laughed. My fingers are like little magnets. The sack went from X-Ray to Armpit to Squid. Squid tossed the sack to Zigzag. Stanley knew it would come to him next. He didn't even want it. From the moment Magnet shouted, anyone want some sunflower seeds, he knew there would be trouble. Mr. Sir was sure to come back. And anyway, the salted shells would only make him thirsty. Coming your way, Caveman, said Zigzag. Air mail and special delivery. It's unclear whether the seeds spilled before they got to Stanley or after he dropped the bag. It seemed to him that Zigzag hadn't rolled to the top before throwing it, and that was the reason he didn't catch it. But it all happened very fast. One moment the sack was flying through the air. The next thing Stanley knew, the sack was in his hole and seeds were spilled across the dirt. Oh man, said Magnet. Sorry, Stanley said. I don't want to eat dirt, said X-Ray. Stanley didn't know what to do. The truck's coming, shouted Zigzag. Stanley looked up at the approaching dust cloud, then back down at the spilled seeds. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. What else is new? He dug his shovel into his hole and tried to overturn the dirt and bury the seeds. What he should have done, he realized later, was knock one of his dirt piles back into his hole. But the idea of putting dirt into his hole was unthinkable. Hello, Mr. Sir, said X-Ray. Back so soon? Seems like you were just here, said Armpit. Time flies when you're having fun, said Magnet. Stanley continued to turn dirt over in his hole. You Girl Scouts having a good time? Asked Mr. Sir. He moved from one hole to another. He kicked a dirt pile by Magnet's hole and then moved towards Stanley. Stanley could see 2 seeds at the bottom of his hole. As he tried to cover them up, he unearthed the corner of the sack. Well, what do you know, Caveman, said Mr. Sir, standing over him. It looks like you found something. Stanley didn't know what to do. Dig it out, Mr. Sir said. We'll take it to the ward and maybe she'll give you the rest of the day off. It's not anything, Stanley muttered. Let me be the judge of that, said Mr. Sir. Stanley reached down and pulled up the empty burlap sack. He tried to hand it to Mr. Sir, but he wouldn't take it. So tell me, Caveman, said Mr. Sir. How did my sack of sunflower seeds get into your hole? I stole it from your truck. You did? Yes, Mr. Sir. What happened to all the sunflower seeds? I ate them? By yourself. Yes, Mr. Sir. Hey, Caveman, shouted Armpit. How come you didn't share any with us? That's cold, man, said X-Ray. I thought you were our friend, said Magnet. Mr. Sir looked around from one boy to another and then back to Stanley. We'll see what the warden has to say about this. Let's go. Stanley climbed up out of his hole and followed Mr. Stern to the truck. He still held the empty sack. It felt good to sit inside the truck, out of the direct rays of sun. Stanley was surprised he could feel good about anything at the moment, but he did. It felt good to sit down in a comfortable seat for a change, and as the truck bounced along the dirt, he was able to appreciate the hot air blowing through the window onto his hot and sweaty face. So, in the next chapter, we're going to see how the warden deals out punishment for people that steal sunflower seeds. Have a good day, guys.